The pre-dawn chill enveloped the silent suburban street in a biting cold, where a gaunt, anxious German shepherd stood trembling behind a rusted chain-link fence, two frail puppies clinging to her flank for a sliver of warmth. Frost coated the wilted grass, reflecting the weak, flickering glow of a solitary street lamp, while the mother dog shifted uneasily, sensing the fierce wind that probed every unguarded crack. Within the modest walls of a small house on that street, Henry dozed fitfully on a sagging couch, lulled by the hushed drone of late-night infomercials, wholly oblivious to the life-and-death struggle playing out beyond his door. He stirred when the old heater clanked to life, its sudden metallic groan amplifying a vague foreboding that had shadowed his restless sleep. Outside, the German shepherd whimpered, her ears darting at distant sounds, aware that time was running thin to protect her offspring from the relentless cold threatening to devour them. One tiny pup let out a faint squeak, prompting the mother to press her muzzle to its quivering form, a futile attempt to stave off the creeping frost that penetrated her worn fur. Henry, half awake, shuffled to the window to fetch a drink of water, only to glimpse through the glass a canine silhouette trembling against the fence, exhaling ragged puffs of vapor into the frozen air. Blinking away his grogginess, he realized it was a female shepherd, her stance torn between flight and desperate hope, as though weighing the odds of trusting any human at such an hour. His stomach twisted at the sight of the two smaller lumps at her side, puppies so tiny they could hardly withstand the predatory chill of the winter dawn. A memory flickered through Henry's mind, how he once took in a stray kitten despite warnings, and that recollection spurred him to act rather than hide behind caution. Flicking on the porch light, he watched the yard flood with a dim glow, causing the mother dog to recoil, ears flattened, her posture rigid with uncertainty. Yet in her wide, anxious eyes, Henry saw a glimmer of plea, an unspoken appeal for aid that no decent heart could ignore. Carefully, he eased open his front door, bracing himself against a blast of frigid wind that gnawed at his arms beneath his threadbare sweater. The German shepherd let out a low, trembling whine, torn between running and the faint possibility that this stranger might be her only hope. Henry's heart hammered as he stepped onto the creaking porch, every board groaning loudly in a neighborhood otherwise drowned in winter's hush. A gust whipped against his face, forcing him to squint, but the image of the quivering pups fueled a determination stronger than his own reservations. Ducking inside briefly, he rifled through a hallway closet until his fingers closed on a faded flannel blanket, a piece of old camping gear he had nearly forgotten. Holding the blanket out like a peace offering, he returned to the porch, acutely aware that a single misstep might shatter whatever fragile bridge of trust he hoped to build. The mother dog sniffed the air in short, anxious bursts, each visible exhalation swirling around her muzzle, as though she measured Henry's intentions with every breath. In one smooth motion, Henry spread the blanket on the frost-rimmed grass, stepping back with palms open to show he meant no harm. In a poignant show of maternal devotion, the shepherd nudged one pup onto the fabric, then coaxed the other along, determined to find even the slightest respite from the killing cold. Shivering, she settled onto the frayed cloth, never breaking eye contact with Henry, her body taut as a coiled spring despite this small concession. Though a delicate truce seemed to form, Henry recognized that any sudden movement might reignite her protectiveness or push her to flee into the darkness. The pups let out faint cries, each whimper a plea that gnawed at Henry's conscience, reminding him that their time in the bitter air was limited. Summoning gentleness into his voice, he murmured calming reassurances, hoping each soft syllable would convey safety in a world that had given the dog little reason to believe in kindness. Meanwhile, his mind teemed with practical worries, veterinary costs, the risk of disease, but compassion overwhelmed such concerns, commanding him to persist in helping. The shepherd raised her muzzle again, half-flattened ears broadcasting her uncertainty, as if she still debated the wisdom of placing her pup's fate in human hands. Spotting a cardboard box propped against the wall, Henry bent to pick it up, envisioning a small fortress to keep the pups off the frozen ground. He lined it with a worn towel, each rustle making the mother tense, though she held her place, her gaze darting between Henry and her shivering babies. The scratch of cardboard on ice made Henry's heart jolt, but he noticed a slight hesitant wag of her tail, a fleeting signal that she might allow him to continue. Steeling himself, he gently lifted one pup, overwhelmed by how feather-light it felt, its ribs shuddering beneath his touch in a silent testament to how close they were to danger. The mother whined softly, nosing Henry's hand before shifting to sniff at her pup, as though granting him provisional approval. After placing the pup in the makeshift box, he repeated the process for its sibling, bundling them in the blanket and marveling at how they nestled together for warmth. Now, the larger hurdle remained, persuading the mother to follow her pups into the unknown shelter of his home, a realm of strange scents and hidden possibilities. Henry stepped back toward the open doorway, voice low yet urgent, appealing to the mother's instinct to keep her pups close in a safer, warmer place. She watched him, eyes flicking from the box to the faint glow inside his home, poised at the threshold of fear and hope. Snow drifted from the overcast sky, dusting her back and ears, each flake a silent reminder that winter's lethal embrace would not relent. Henry's pulse throbbed in his temples, keenly aware that any misjudgment could send her bolting into the iced expanse with no second chance at rescue. At last, with trembling caution, she rose, nudged the box, and inched her way onto the porch, guided by the faint promise of warmth and protection. As she crossed into Henry's dimly lit living room, her puppies cradled in that flimsy box, neither of them imagined how that single act of compassion would irreversibly entwine their fates. Once inside the dimly lit living room, the German Shepherd lingered near the doorway, her pups squirming within their makeshift box as she surveyed this unknown environment with wary, hopeful eyes. Henry quietly shut the door behind them, heart still pounding from the tense standoff on the porch, astonished that she had chosen trust over flight. A ragged exhalation escaped him as the old heater breathed warm air against his chilled skin, an instant reminder of how dire her situation had been out in the merciless cold. The dog, still on edge, pressed her muzzle against one pup's back, as if confirming its presence and reassuring herself that this strange place had not harmed them. Wanting to help but aware that sudden movements might spook her, he inched closer, murmuring soothing words that resonated like gentle ripples in the hush of the room. The worn ceiling light flickered momentarily, throwing sporadic shadows against the walls and intensifying the sense that the smallest disturbance could trigger her protective instincts. Clasping his hands together, Henry mustered his courage and moved toward the kitchen, determined to find something, anything that might serve as a basic meal for the underfed mother dog. A solitary can of chicken broth, along with half a bag of rice, caught his eye in a cluttered cupboard, humble supplies, but perhaps enough to offer her some badly needed sustenance. As water began to boil on the stovetop, he mulled over the new reality. These unexpected guests had upended his quiet life, and a sense of anxious responsibility mingled with a flicker of resolve. The mother dog circled the box, sniffing each edge, apparently taking stock of the meager lodging Henry had provided for her pups. Now and then she glanced at him, ears half lowered, as if assessing the balance between gratitude for his help and the caution hammered into her by past experiences. When the pot finally reached a rolling boil, Henry emptied in the chicken broth, stirring in the rice, hoping the simple concoction would be gentle on her stomach yet filling enough to restore some strength. Meanwhile, the pups squirmed over one another with tiny, plaintive squeaks that tugged at Henry's heart, each sound a reminder of how utterly vulnerable they were. Realizing they needed a more stable setup than a cardboard box on the living room carpet, Henry rummaged in a rarely opened closet for an old laundry basket he had nearly thrown away months prior. After lining it with spare towels, he returned to the dogs, positioning the basket near the heater so they could bask in a steady warmth they had likely never known before. The German Shepherd tracked his every movement, stepping forward whenever he neared her pups, her stance protective but not overtly hostile, a delicate acceptance of his fumbling help. As the broth and rice cooked, an inviting aroma drifted through the air, prompting the dog to lift her nose in cautious curiosity, though she refused to wander far from her babies. Carefully ladling a small portion into a shallow bowl, Henry set it near the basket, ensuring it had cooled enough not to scald her mouth. She eyed the offering, ears flicking in a sign of lingering mistrust, but the scent of food seemed too compelling to ignore in her weakened state. Slowly she crept toward the bowl, pausing every few steps to glance back at the basket, fearful of letting her vulnerable pups out of sight for even a moment. Each tentative lap of the broth signaled a tiny victory, her top posture easing slightly as the warmth of nourishment took hold. Henry kept still, resisting the urge to draw closer or pet her, recognizing that patience was key to earning this traumatized dog's faith. After finishing most of the bowl, she pivoted back to the laundry basket, sniffing each pup in turn as though ensuring they remained untouched and secure. The pups wriggled at her presence, their feeble cries subsiding into softer peeps once they felt her familiar warmth, a subtle but powerful testament to maternal devotion. Feeling a swell of relief, Henry realized he'd been holding his breath, and he exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. His gaze drifted to her thin frame, the sharp outlines of her ribs underscoring just how critical it was for her to eat and regain strength if she hoped to keep nursing her babies. Despite the gravity of the situation, a spark of wonder took root inside him, an unfamiliar drive to protect these lives entrusted by chance to his care. The heater rattled with a metallic chug, a comfortingly ordinary noise in an otherwise extraordinary moment, reminding Henry that, for now, they were safe from the biting cold. In quiet intervals, he replenished the bowl with small portions, watching the mother dog carefully gauge his intentions before lapping up more broth. Each time she fed, she seemed to relinquish a fraction more of her fear, her wary eyes lifting occasionally to meet Henry's as if measuring his sincerity. Unsure how long the night had left, he resisted the pull of fatigue, determined to keep an eye on her condition and that of the pups, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. While the pups mostly slept, their tiny bodies wiggling whenever a sibling jostled them, Henry felt a tug in his chest, an irrational protectiveness that overrode common sense about stray animals. Now and then, the mother would let him inch a bit closer, not so close as to touch her, but near enough that he could check the pup's breathing without eliciting a snarl or a retreat. The subtle trust building gave Henry hope that perhaps, with gentleness and time, this family might find stability within his walls rather than returning to the hostile outdoors. Yet he remained realistic enough to acknowledge the challenges, vet bills, possible diseases, and the daily demands of newborn pups, trials he had never planned for in his routine life. As the hours ticked toward dawn, the mother's posture grew less tense, though she remained vigilant, glancing over her shoulder at every new sound emanating from the aging house. By the first light of morning, mother and pups had settled in a warm huddle beside the heater, their combined breathing a quiet, rhythmic testament to resilience. Henry, fighting drowsiness, found a blanket of his own and sank into an armchair, his mind whirling with thoughts of how drastically his world had shifted in such a short span. The last thing he remembered before dozing off was the gentle rise and fall of the German shepherd's chest, her puppies pressed to her belly, safe for at least one more night. As sleep claimed him, he understood that this was no fleeting gesture. He had effectively opened more than his door. He had opened his life to a small family that needed him in ways he never imagined. Weak morning light seeped through the curtains, illuminating the living room with a cool gray hue that revealed the German shepherd and her pups still curled by the heater. Henry stirred from a restless doze, his neck aching from the awkward angle of the armchair, but a surge of purpose overcame his fatigue the moment he glimpsed the vulnerable trio. The dog raised her head to watch him, her eyes guarded yet reflecting a trace more trust than the night before, as if acknowledging his role in sparing her pups from the cold. In measured steps, Henry approached, greeting her softly, hoping to reaffirm that his intentions were still benign and that he would not violate the fragile trust she offered. The pups wriggled, producing faint squeaks that underscored their utter dependence, prompting the mother to lick them as if to reassure them that their unlikely shelter remained safe. Noting that only scraps of the previous night's food remained, Henry realized they would soon need more substantial nourishment, and he braced himself for a trip to the local store. Pulling on his coat, he cast a final glance at the mother dog, who watched intently as though unsure if he would vanish and never return, leaving them stranded again. He whispered a promise to be back soon, stepping outside into a world still coated in a thin veneer of frost, the air biting at his cheeks as a stark reminder of what could have been their fate. Each crunch of his boots on the snow-laden driveway fueled his conviction that bringing them indoors had been the only morally acceptable choice. The corner store was nearly deserted at such an early hour, and Henry collected dog kibble, puppy formula, plus a few additional blankets with a single-minded resolve of someone stepping into uncharted territory. At the register, the cashier gave him a puzzled look when he unloaded the supplies, but Henry volunteered no backstory, unwilling to risk judgment or prying curiosity. Shuffling back home, he felt an odd sense of duty burning in his chest, reminiscent of a soldier determined to defend those who could not defend themselves. Re-entering the house, he found the mother dog alert but not hostile, her ears perked and her eyes following his every movement from across the living room. Setting down the bags, he unpacked the kibble and a shallow water dish, aware that the simplest acts, like providing nourishment, took on monumental importance for this little family. Her tail gave the slightest wag, a barely perceptible gesture, but one that caused Henry's heart to clench with a mix of relief and an unspoken gratitude that his help was being accepted. He filled a bowl with kibble, then poured warm water into another, placing them a cautious distance away so she could approach without feeling cornered. The German shepherd sniffed at the kibble, uncertain, perhaps unaccustomed to processed dog food or still grappling with the abrupt shift from desperate survival to hesitant security. Remembering the pups would likely need specialized sustenance, Henry fumbled with the instructions on the puppy formula, determined to do right by these helpless creatures. In the quiet hush of the morning, he prepared a small batch, stirring the powder into lukewarm water, though he knew they might not be ready to lap it up just yet. Glancing at the mother's muzzle, he noticed a faint scar near her snout, likely a vestige of past hardships, and anger flickered in him at whoever had once neglected or abandoned her. For the next few hours, he monitored her feeding, pleased to see she would tentatively eat the kibble, though she remained skittish about his presence whenever he came too near. The pups slept more often than not, only stirring to produce tiny whines or to crawl instinctively toward the mother's belly in search of warmth. Occasionally, the mother stretched her neck toward Henry's outstretched hand, sniffing it for several seconds before retreating, as though memorizing his scent in increments. The living room took on a makeshift nursery atmosphere, scattered with towels, blankets, and food bowls, each item forming a patchwork of improvised care. Realizing professional guidance was overdue, Henry dialed a nearby veterinarian, bracing himself for whatever costs or obstacles lay ahead. After a few rings, a calm voice answered, and he explained the situation, detailing the mother's thin frame, the pups' approximate ages, and their precarious origin. The receptionist, sounding both empathetic and slightly concerned, scheduled an appointment that afternoon, assuring Henry they would find a way to assist regardless of financial uncertainty. Relief mingled with anxiety as Henry ended the call, conscious that the mother dog's gaze had not left him, her brown eyes reflecting an uncanny awareness. Determined to make the space more comfortable, he shifted furniture around, creating an open area near the heater where she and her pups could move freely without feeling cramped. The pups, eyes still sealed against the world, wiggled in sporadic bursts of restless energy, their tiny limbs ill-equipped to support more than a few inches of travel. Each time one squeaked in discontent, the mother responded with a gentle lick, unyielding in her dedication despite her own evident exhaustion. Stumbling upon a slow drip in the kitchen sink, Henry realized how thoroughly his daily rhythms had been overtaken by concern for this new, unexpected family. Far from resenting it, he felt strangely invigorated, as though given a chance to enact a compassion he once believed was lost amid the grind of adult life. A soft knock on the door startled him. A curious neighbor had seen him lugging supplies and wondered if everything was all right, but Henry offered only a brief explanation. Closing the door, he turned to find the German Shepherd standing a few feet away, sniffing his pant leg, as though verifying he had not brought danger with him. Though her ribs jutted starkly, she carried herself with a resilient dignity, and Henry silently pledged that he would help her regain strength. With the vet appointment looming, he gathered the pups in a padded basket, layering towels to cushion their tiny bodies, mindful of how easily they could be chilled. The mother paced nervously at his side, unwilling to let the pups out of her sight, her eyes flicking between him and the basket in protective alarm. Henry took a deep breath, double-checking the thermostat and turning off the lights, his pulse pounding at the thought of venturing into the world with these fragile dogs in tow. And in that solemn moment, as he gently fixed a makeshift leash around a mother's neck and lifted the basket of sleeping pups, he recognized that a quiet line had been crossed, binding his life to theirs in ways he scarcely understood. Now flakes drifted lazily across the windshield as Henry navigated the slippery roads, mother dog curled in the back seat, and her pups bundled in a foam-lined crate, each bump in the pavement jostling Henry's nerves. The sky remained a dull silver blanket, threatening a heavier snowfall, though Henry told himself they only needed to reach the vet's office before it became impassable. In the rearview mirror, the German Shepherd's eyes darted anxiously, her posture rigid with unease, while the pups let out the occasional squeak from their makeshift nest. Henry gripped the steering wheel in quiet defiance of his own apprehensions, his heart pounding with the weight of responsibility that had descended upon him so suddenly. Pulling into the modest parking lot, he spotted a lone sign for the clinic, flurries swirling around it in erratic gusts that hinted at an approaching storm. After cutting the engine, he exhaled, gathering his courage before stepping out into the biting cold to carefully retrieve the crate of pups. The mother dog sniffed at the open car door, then leapt down to the pavement, pressing her muzzle against the crate as if to reassure her babies they hadn't been abandoned yet again. Inside the clinic's entrance, the warmth and bustling energy of the reception area was jarringly different from Henry's quiet home, fluorescent lights illuminating rows of brochures about pet care. A veterinary assistant named Clara, whom Henry had spoken with on the phone, appeared from behind the counter and hurried over, her kind eyes reflecting immediate concern as she took in the mother's skeletal frame. Whispering soft reassurances, Clara led them to an exam room, a sterile space with gleaming metal tools, and an exam table that looked far too clinical for such a tender situation. The mother dog cowered near Henry's legs, suspicious of every clang and rustle, as though recalling a past experience that made her wary of enclosed rooms. Soon, a calm-voiced veterinarian named Dr. Mills joined them, gently approaching the mother dog while Clara noted down the pup sizes and attempted to estimate their ages. Dr. Mills ran practiced hands along the shepherd's spine, feeling for injuries or signs of malnutrition, her expression turning solemn at the pronounced ribs and visible hip bones. Each time the stethoscope touched her fur, the mother dog flinched but did not snap, as though clinging to the dim hope that these humans might help rather than harm. Henry stood by, heart thudding, waiting for any sign that the pups were in danger, dread stirring the pit of his stomach at the thought of hidden illnesses or worse. With professional efficiency, Dr. Mills examined each tiny pup, checking reflexes, heartbeats, and body temperature, while Clara cooed gently to keep them calm. Though underweight and extremely young, the pups showed no immediate critical issues, prompting Henry to release the breath he'd been holding in a flood of relieved gratitude. The mother, however, required urgent nutritional support, possible deworming, and a thorough vaccination plan, costly measures, but Henry found himself surprisingly undeterred by the financial aspect. In hushed tones, Dr. Mills explained the next steps: scheduled checkups, a controlled diet to help the mother regain health, and precise instructions for transitioning the pups off her milk once they were older. Clara disappeared momentarily and returned with an armful of pamphlets about caring for newborn puppies, as well as sample packs of specialized puppy food. Henry's head spun with the sudden avalanche of information, each new point underscoring how drastically his life had changed since he first opened his door to that freezing dog and her helpless pups. He nodded through the onslaught of details: vaccination timelines, spaying considerations, microchipping, his chest tightening at the realization that what had begun as a simple rescue now demanded long-term commitment. The mother dog nosed the pups protectively when Clara tried to weigh them, her maternal instincts never wavering despite her thin body trembling from stress. Henry stroked her back with 2 fingers, cautious not to overstep boundaries, but she did not pull away, and that small acceptance tugged at his heart. Signing papers at the front desk, Henry felt the strain on his wallet, but he silenced the voice of doubt by recalling how the pups had quivered in the cold, so near to succumbing to a brutal winter. Clara handed him a slip with phone numbers for low-cost vet services and local shelters, urging him to reach out if the financial burden became too great. Though touched by the offer, Henry couldn't imagine surrendering the dogs now that they had crossed the threshold into his life, forging a fragile yet profound bond. Outside, the snow fell more heavily, blanketing the streets in a layer of white as if to underscore the dangerous fate the mother and pups had escaped. He helped the shepherd back into the car, securing the crate so it wouldn't tip during the drive, each movement guided by protective care he never knew he possessed. She settled in, licking one of the pups on the head before glancing back at Henry, her eyes carrying a question he interpreted as cautious gratitude. The drive home felt oddly serene despite the swirling flurries, as though the certainty of a plan to nurse them back to health offered a grounding purpose. Every skid on the icy road sent a jolt of adrenaline through Henry, but his resolve held firm, fueled by the knowledge that he was no longer acting solely for himself. Parking in his driveway, he paused to gather his thoughts, noticing how the windows of his home glowed invitingly against the dreary winter backdrop. With careful steps, he carried the crate inside, the mother dog close at his heels, her pups letting out mewling sounds that echoed off the walls of the foyer. The inside air felt warmer now, as though reflecting the quiet transformation Henry's home had undergone since the moment he decided to open his door. Setting the crate down, he crouched to let the mother dog inspect the living room, half expecting her to recoil, but she strode in with surprising confidence. Perhaps she sensed that this space, however humble, was an arena of safety where her pups could thrive rather than a place of unknown threats. Glancing at the vet paperwork in his hand, Henry felt a mixture of apprehension and a fierce drive to do right by this small family that had chosen him by chance. He unlatched the crate, watching the mother guide her pups out onto a cushioned blanket he laid by the heater, the pups whining softly as they settled in. As the snowstorm raged outside, Henry sank into his armchair, reflecting on how a single decision to open his door had catapulted him into a guardianship more demanding and more deeply fulfilling than he ever anticipated. Over the following days, the German shepherd and her 2 pups settled into an unspoken rhythm with Henry, each morning defined by early feedings, cautious explorations, and the steady hum of the old heater. The mother grew bolder, wandering short distances from her pups to investigate corners of the living room, sniffing furniture as though mapping a new kingdom she half expected to vanish. Henry, meanwhile, devoted himself to learning the basics of puppy care, poring over the pamphlets Clara had given him, each page thick with instructions and potential pitfalls that made his head spin. Whenever he felt overwhelmed, he recalled the trembling forms he had found out in the cold, reminding himself that compassion and perseverance would guide him through every logistical challenge. Several times a day, he prepared small servings of high-nutrient food for the mother, in quiet defiance of the cost, determined to restore her to a healthy weight so she could better nurse her pups. The pups themselves began twitching and squeaking more often, their soft, fumbling movements drawing both the mother's vigilant nose and Henry's watchful eye. Though their eyes remained sealed, they occasionally tested their legs, pushing against the soft blankets as if eager to explore a world they could only feel and smell. The mother no longer flinched whenever Henry approached, though she maintained a guarded air, a constant reminder that trust is fragile and earned in increments. He established a small schedule for them, morning feedings, midday checks, and gentle cleaning of the blankets in the evening, culminating in brief but heartfelt moments when he would speak softly to the mother dog. Sometimes she tilted her head at his voice, as though puzzled by his calm sincerity, a far cry from whatever experiences had shaped her wary disposition. The house itself felt transformed, no longer just a shelter for one man's solitude, but communal space echoing with the faint, hopeful whimpers of new life. He tackled a stack of unopened mail that had piled up, suddenly motivated to put his affairs in order, as if the dog's presence had injected him with a need for responsible structure. Phone calls to the vet became almost routine, updates about the pup's progress, and the mother's appetite weaving a new sense of connection between Henry and the outside world. On the fourth day, the mother greeted Henry at the door when he returned from a quick trip to buy more dog supplies, her tail wagging in a gentle, measured sway that spoke volumes. The pups still huddled in their nest, but their tiny heads lifted at new sounds, hinting that soon they would open their eyes to the bright, shifting shapes of a safe indoor realm. Over supper, Henry found himself daydreaming about potential names for the pups, feeling both excitement and a twinge of sadness at the knowledge that he might eventually have to find them new homes. The mother, who had begun responding to simple cues and shifting her gaze when Henry called her, seemed intent on watching him from across the room, as though she, too, was learning how to live in shared companionship. One evening, as a light snow tapped against the windows, Henry sat on the floor beside the basket, letting the mother sniff his hands and arms, a silent exchange of sense and acceptance. In those tentative moments, he felt the weight of responsibility sharpen into a deeper sense of devotion, imagining the heartbreak if he had turned them away on that frigid night. Encouraged by her gradual acceptance, Henry introduced gentle touches, first stroking the fur along her neck, mindful of her flinches, then softly patting her side when she showed no signs of unease. The pups emitted curious whines, possibly sensing the shift in their mother's demeanor, the subtle relaxation that signaled a growing trust in the man who had saved them. Between trips to the vet for weight checks and socialization advice, Henry juggled everyday tasks like laundry and cleaning, feeling more alive than he had in years. The old routines of monotony and isolation now seemed distant, replaced by the urgent needs of 3 canines who depended on his consistent care for survival. Each vet visit brought small victories, the mother's weight climbing, the pups beginning to recognize his scent, and Dr. Mills praising Henry's diligent follow-through. Though financial worries nagged at him, especially as the pups would soon require vaccinations, he found creative ways to cut corners, skipping personal luxuries to ensure they had everything they needed. At night, he often lay awake listening to the mother's soft breathing, mindful of the new life blossoming in his once quiet house, in quiet defiance of any lingering doubts. An unspoken routine cemented itself. Henry up at dawn for the dog's first meal, the mother nuzzling the pups awake, and a midday check-in where he meticulously logged each pup's progress. When he glimpsed the mother dog occasionally dozing in a patch of sunlight near the window, he found himself smiling, heartened by how far they had come from that desperate porch scene. Sometimes, neighbors peered curiously through the fence or asked about the sounds of puppies, but Henry guarded the details closely, uncertain how to articulate the gravity of this small miracle. Late one afternoon, as twilight seeped into the sky, the mother crept over to Henry's feet and settled her muzzle on his knee, a gesture that caught him off guard in its quiet tenderness. He stroked her ears with tentative affection, marveling at how a once trembling stray could display such open trust, and how that trust, in turn, rekindled something gentle within him. The pups stirred, as if drawn by the sense of calm, letting out tiny yips and squeaks, which prompted their mother to rise and tend to them, reaffirming her central role in this improvised family. Henry's own emotional landscape felt transformed, each day bridging the gap between caretaker and companion, forging a bond that transcended language. By the end of the first week, the pups began cracking their eyes open, squinting at the unfamiliar brightness, and Henry found himself whispering encouraging words, as though cheering them on in a race toward life. The mother stayed close, letting them roam within the confines of the living room, occasionally nosing them back if they ventured too far, protective instincts still honed by earlier hardships. In one fleeting moment, Henry noticed that her tail wagged more often, a sign that gratitude had eclipsed doubt, and the gentle wave of her tail matched the warmth glowing inside his own heart. Every so often, he allowed himself a daydream of the pups growing strong and bounding across a safe yard, with a mother healthy and confident at his side, free from the shadows of her past. Practical realities loomed, yet the synergy of hope and daily progress propelled him forward. One more bag of dog food, one more vet check, one more cautious step toward unwavering trust. With each passing day, the memory of how he found him, huddled in bone-chilling cold, close to surrender, faded into a potent testament of why a single act of mercy matters. And as night fell once more, with the pups drifting into contented sleep and the mother dozing against Henry's leg, he realized their presence had achieved something extraordinary. They had thawed a piece of his own heart he never knew was frozen. Another week slipped by, marked by incremental milestones, the pups gaining weight, the mother's cautious demeanor evolving into a gentle confidence that hinted at happier days ahead. Henry juggled the labyrinth of responsibilities, from scheduled vet visits to teaching the pups basic boundaries, feeling both exhausted and oddly fulfilled by each challenge conquered. In the living room, once a domain of lonely routine, blankets and chew toys now lay scattered among Henry's old belongings, symbolizing the merging of two very different worlds. The mother dog began wagging her tail openly whenever Henry returned from errands, greeting him with a soft whine of recognition that lifted the corners of his worn spirit. Most mornings, Henry found the pups attempting to wobble around on unsteady legs, their eyes brighter now, their curiosity spurring them to investigate every nook of the house. Sometimes they tumbled into each other, letting out adorable yips that sent the mother trotting over to nudge them back onto their clumsy paws. Watching this tiny family adapt and thrive under his roof, Henry experienced a surge of pride and protective devotion he had never anticipated feeling for animals he hadn't even known a short while ago. Friends and acquaintances who learned of his new charges texted or called, some offering help, others questioning whether he could handle the workload, but Henry brushed off the doubts. He prepared a small fenced area in the backyard, mindful of the diminishing snow, so the pups could eventually experience fresh air in a controlled, safe environment. The mother, though initially nervous about stepping outside again, seemed to appreciate the chance to sniff the faint traces of spring creeping into the chilly wind. Day by day, the weight in Henry's wallet lessened, vet costs, food, and supplies adding up, and yet the intangible rewards of saving these dogs outweighed any financial strain. Each time he marveled at the mother's recovering physique, ribs no longer as pronounced, he knew he would do it all again without hesitation. Neighbors sometimes peered over the fence, curious about the playful barks and wagging tails, and Henry, once reluctant to engage with them, now found himself eager to share the story of their rescue. The pups began responding to his gentle attempts at training, learning to recognize his voice and even stumbling through the beginnings of commands like come or stay. Their mother observed these sessions with unwavering focus, occasionally intervening when the pups grew too rambunctious, as though Henry and she had formed a silent parenting partnership. The living room walls that had once echoed with lonely quiet now vibrated with the antics of two furry explorers, each day rewriting the narrative of a house that had grown stale over time. A swirl of phone alerts one afternoon announced that a late snowstorm was on the way, reminding Henry of the harsh night he first encountered the mother dog trembling on his porch. He shuddered at how close they had all come to missing each other by mere minutes, a near miss that could have spelled tragedy for the pups. Determined not to let them grow complacent, he continued adjusting their diets, ensuring the mother received the right balance of proteins and fats, while the pups learned to eat soft kibble with occasional formula supplementation. Visits to Dr. Mills became routine checkups rather than emergencies, with each weigh-in confirming steady progress, an outcome that filled Henry with quiet triumph. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of the mother dog dozing in a patch of sunlight, muzzle relaxed, not a trace of the haunted look she carried those first couple of days. The pups scampered around her, batting at each other with clumsy paws and engaging in mock fights that ended when she gave a gentle, corrective nudge. Witnessing this healthy family dynamic unfold, Henry realized how profoundly an act of mercy could ripple outward, transforming not only the lives rescued but also the rescuer's own perspective. Strangers who heard the story urged him to consider adoption for the pups once they were old enough, but Henry hesitated, uncertain if he could part with them after pouring so much effort and love into their survival. In the twilight hours, he sometimes questioned whether the mother dog would eventually move on or if her bond to him would cement into something lasting, like a deep gratitude woven into trust. Perhaps, he mused, the hardships she had endured made her cling to the security of a warm home and consistent meals, forging a loyalty that few would break. Although the pups still lacked names, Henry had started calling them playful nicknames, letting the mother watch and decide whether she approved of his silly attempts at labeling her offspring. As nights grew shorter and the promise of spring dawned, the sense of new beginnings became palpable in every corner of Henry's house, from the reorganized cupboards brimming with dog supplies to the rearranged furniture that catered to wagging tails and curious noses. Each time Henry felt a tug of exhaustion, he remembered that bitter cold night, replaying how thin the line had been between life and death, and how easily he might have shut the door and walked away. Gratitude and determination fueled him, overshadowing the inconveniences of extra laundry, midday cleanup, and adjusting his schedule around feedings. The mother, sensing his unwavering commitment, began seeking him out for gentle pats and ear rubs, forging a silent language of trust that bridged the species divide. The pups, now opening their eyes wide, would scamper after him whenever he moved about, sometimes tripping over their own feet in comedic, endearing displays of innocence. On the final day of winter, a watery sun broke through the clouds, and Henry opened the back door to let in fresh air. The mother approached the threshold with a confident stance, her pups following in wobbly excitement. Though the snow lingered in patches, she guided them carefully, as if teaching them to respect the lingering cold that had once nearly claimed their lives. Henry stood by, arms crossed against the chill, marveling at how an act of compassion had birthed an entire new chapter in a home he once found quietly suffocating. Paw prints marked the slushy ground, tracking the pups' uncertain steps as they chased each other in clumsy arcs, eyes shining with simple joy. The mother watched vigilantly, occasionally glancing back at Henry, a silent acknowledgement of the partnership that had brought them all to this safer day. Something in Henry's chest tightened, a mix of awe and tenderness that words could barely capture, an awareness that by saving them, he had saved a part of himself too. With a faint laugh, he called them back inside before the chill grew worse, ushering them into the warm living room where the heater's steady hum promised comfort. Closing the door behind them, Henry understood that this journey, born of a split-second decision to open that same door weeks ago, would continue shaping his life in unpredictable and profoundly heartwarming ways.